They say the world sees what it wants to see. A black girl, a hoodie, a first-class seat, and suddenly that's a problem. This isn't a story about shouting. It's not about riots. It's not about fists in the air or hashtags burning through timelines. No, this is the story of a girl who refused to shrink, even when the system was designed to make her disappear. Her name is Amira Caldwell, 17, quiet, brilliant, black, and she walks into a world every day that demands she apologize before she even speaks. But this time, she didn't say sorry. On a flight from Los Angeles to Atlanta, Amira sat in seat 1C, not by accident, not by privilege, but because she earned it. She wore a hoodie because it was cold, because it was hers, because it made her feel safe. But to Tina Hawkins, the senior flight attendant on duty, that hoodie wasn't fabric. It was a challenge, a threat, a reason to question her, to file a false report, to have her pulled from her seat in front of a plane full of strangers, treated like an imposter in a place she belonged. She could have yelled, she could have cried, she could have lashed out, but she didn't. She sat still, looked them in the eye, and let her silence say what 1,000 protests couldn't. I'm not here for your comfort. I'm here because I belong. What Tina didn't know was this: Amira's father? He wasn't just any man. He was Miles Caldwell, the silent architect behind the very airline Tina worked for. And he didn't raise a daughter to fold in the face of bias. He raised her to walk through it, with stillness, with clarity, with purpose. This is the story of what happened when a black girl refused to be erased, when a hoodie became a statement, when silence became power, and when the world realized she didn't need to scream to be heard. San Francisco International Airport had its own pulse, smooth and relentless, like the inside of a luxury watch. No matter where you turned, everything moved with purpose. Fast-walking suits dragging Rimowa luggage behind them, family groups with screaming toddlers, college students balancing overpriced coffees and backpacks. Everyone had somewhere to be, and they all moved like the world expected them to. Amira Caldwell stood still. She blended into the crowd the way shadows blend into pavement, present, quiet, almost ignored. But not quite. Some people noticed her, and they didn't like what they saw. 17 years old, skin a rich shade of copper brown, hair in two tight braids falling beneath the hood of a faded navy sweatshirt that had been through more washes than anyone could count. Her shoes were clean but plain, and her jeans hugged her slim frame with the relaxed fit of someone who prioritized comfort over fashion statements. The hoodie, though, that was what drew eyes. Unintentionally, unavoidably, it marked her, not with a logo or some loud color, but with what people thought they knew about girls who wore hoodies like armor, especially black girls, alone, quiet, in the first-class boarding area. She stood near gate B14 with her boarding pass in one hand and a beat-up black duffel in the other. Her carry-on wasn't monogrammed. There were no tags from luxury hotels hanging off the handles, just a worn keychain, a pair of silver wings her dad gave her when she was 10. Cheap, slightly tarnished, but treasured. The boarding pass had been checked 3 times already, not because she thought there was a mistake, because she liked seeing it. Group 1, Seat 1C, first class. It wasn't luck. It wasn't someone else's. It was hers. She'd earned it. After 12 weeks in the Caltech Summer Science Fellowship, full ride, all expenses paid, and top 3 in her group, this flight home was her father's gift. "You flew to that program like a coach passenger," he'd told her, "but you're coming home like a queen." Only queens didn't wear hoodies in airports. At least that's what the world seemed to believe. Her phone buzzed in her pocket. "Dad, let me know when you're on. Watching your flight on the app," she replied quickly. Amira, still at the gate, boarding soon. All good. Another lie. A little one, a protective one. She didn't want him worrying, Didn't want to say she'd already gotten the looks. From the gate agent. From the woman with the designer purse 2 seats down who clutched it tighter when Amira sat nearby. From the man who kept side-eyeing her hoodie like it might start a fight. None of them said anything, but they didn't have to. Amira had learned a long time ago that black stories aren't always told out loud. Sometimes they're written in glances, in extra questions, in the way people look at your hands when you reach into your bag, even if all you're pulling out is a snack. She was used to it. Didn't mean she liked it. The gate screen flickered. Now boarding, Group 1, first class. Amira stood up. A soft ripple went through the waiting area. One of the Patagonia-clad dads nudged his kid. The woman with the purse narrowed her eyes. 2 teenage boys in varsity jackets paused their jokes mid-sentence. Because Amira, hood up, duffel slung over one shoulder, face calm, stepped into the first-class lane. At the front of the line stood a tall woman with a sleek navy blazer, clipboard in one hand, and the kind of expression you couldn't tell was fake until it cracked. Her bun was tight, her lipstick perfect. The kind of person who followed rules to the syllable, but made sure you knew when she was the one reading them. Her name tag said, Tina Hawkins, lead flight attendant. Amira reached the podium. Tina's smile twitched, just a little. The kind of twitch that says, this isn't what I expected. Excuse me, she said, tilting her head. Her voice was smooth, almost kind. Almost. This lane is for first-class passengers. Amira held up the boarding pass. Didn't smile. Didn't flinch. It is first class, she said. Steady. Tina took the ticket between 2 long fingers. Scanned it. Beep. Green. Confirmed. Still, she hesitated. All right, she said. Please go ahead. But her eyes landed on the hoodie. Just a tip. Maybe take that off before the pilot walks through. We try to keep things presentable up front. Amira looked her in the eye and walked through. The jet bridge smelled like cold metal, overworked air conditioning, and the faint tang of jet fuel. Amira walked slowly, not from hesitation, but because she liked the silence it gave her. It was the only part of air travel that felt almost private. The narrow hallway before you stepped into a cabin full of watching eyes and judged appearances. She adjusted her duffel, ran her fingers along the worn seam of the hoodie's cuff. She'd thought about taking it off after Tina's comment, thought about smoothing her hair, about standing up straighter, smiling more. Thought about changing something. She didn't. Because Amira Caldwell had learned something important over the years. You can change your outfit, your hair, your tone, but it won't change what people decide to see when they look at a black girl in a hoodie. And she'd stopped performing for strangers a long time ago. As she stepped onto the plane, the co-pilot, young, red-haired, probably fresh out of flight school, offered a half smile from the doorway. Welcome aboard, he said politely. His eyes flicked to her seat number, then to her face. There was a beat of surprise, but he didn't comment. She gave a small nod and moved past him. Row 1 was near the front, of course, just behind the cockpit door. The kind of seat with extra legroom, a built-in tablet in the armrest, and a flight attendant stationed up front to offer champagne before takeoff. Amira had never been in one before. The last time she flew, she'd been next to the bathroom in economy, trying to nap with a crying baby 2 rows behind her. Her mom had packed her a peanut butter sandwich for the flight, and she'd stretched out a single bag of trail mix across 3 hours. This time, her dad had booked the ticket himself, not through an app, not with Miles. He called a person, he made it personal, because Miles Caldwell didn't play about his daughter, and he had influence, not the loud kind that bragged, but the kind that had a seat at every table in the industry, and a voice people listened to even when it barely rose above a whisper. Amira slipped into her seat. 1C, leather, soft, cool against her skin. She placed her duffel in the overhead bin and took a moment to smooth out her hoodie, not for them. For herself. She sat down, took out her phone. Dad. Boarded yet? She typed. Amira. On board. In seat. No turbulence yet. She didn't mean the plane. Across the aisle, a man in his 40s, white, bald, wearing a Rolex and a smug smirk, leaned back in his seat, glancing over at her just a second too long. Amira ignored him, but the pressure in the cabin had nothing to do with air pressure. It was social. Every movement, every breath was under scrutiny. She knew what people saw when they looked her way. They didn't see her GPA, or her robotics internship, or the essay she'd written on fluid mechanics that got her the scholarship. They didn't see the way she'd spent her summer in lab goggles and stress, pushing her limits. They saw black girl, hoodie, alone. The man cleared his throat. You sure you're in the right seat? He asked, tone casual, but not kind. Amira turned to him. I am, she said plainly. Then she turned back to the window. She wasn't going to argue her right to be here. She wasn't going to smile to make him feel more comfortable. She wasn't going to shrink to make space for someone else's ego. Tina appeared again, clipboard in hand, gliding down the aisle like she was inspecting royalty. She greeted each passenger by last name. Welcome, Mr. Griffin. Hope you enjoy the flight, Ms. Bernstein. Then she got to Amira. No name, no greeting, just a pause. Then, if you need anything, Tina said, just press the call button. She didn't smile, didn't ask if Amira wanted a drink, didn't offer her a warm towel like she had the others. She just moved on. But Amira didn't press the call button. She didn't need to, because she'd already learned that when the world tries to make you feel small, the loudest thing you can do is simply take up your space in silence. The seatbelt sign chimed softly overhead. Passengers shuffled and settled as the cabin crew made final preparations. Some reclined their chairs. Others pulled out iPads or tapped away on their phones. A few dozed off before takeoff, heads tilted back like they had nothing to worry about in the world. Amira just sat there, still, calm, watching. Her phone buzzed once more. Dad, proud of you, always. Call me when you land. She stared at the words for a moment, her thumb hovering over the keyboard. She didn't respond right away. Not because she didn't believe it, but because she didn't want to cry. You learn early when you're black in white spaces that tears aren't currency. They don't buy you comfort. They cost you control. So she swallowed the lump in her throat, tucked the phone away, and folded her hands neatly in her lap. She was wearing a hoodie and sitting in first class, and that was more than enough to make some people shift in their seats. The captain's voice came over the intercom. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome aboard Nova Sky Flight 278 to Atlanta. Flight time will be approximately 4 hours and 23 minutes. Weather's smooth all the way home. Amira turned toward the window. Outside, ground crew moved like ants in neon vests, preparing the aircraft for departure. The sun was dipping low, casting a golden hue across the tarmac, and a single jet roared off in the distance, disappearing into the orange haze. This wasn't just another flight. For her, it was a return to home, to family, to everything she'd been missing since she boarded that outbound flight 12 weeks ago, with a heart full of nerves and hope. But also, this moment was something bigger. It was a quiet act of resistance. A black girl, in a hoodie, in seat 1C. And nobody could take that from her. Footsteps echoed softly down the aisle. Amira looked up. Tina was back. Again. She wasn't holding anything. No water, no towel, just a clipboard and a look that seemed a bit sharper than before. She stopped right next to Amira's seat and leaned in slightly. Just double-checking something, she said smoothly, scanning the name on the manifest once more. Amira Caldwell. Amira nodded. Tina pursed her lips. I assume this ticket was booked under your name. It was, Amira answered. By my father. Tina's eyes flicked down, then up again. And does your father typically travel with you? Amira tilted her head slightly, studying Tina's face. He's meeting me at the arrival gate, she said evenly. He prefers to let me handle things on my own. Thought it'd be a good lesson. Tina gave a tight smile. Right. Well, if you need anything, you can press the call button. She said it again, like it was a warning. Then she walked off. Amira exhaled slowly. The man across the aisle, Mr. Rolex, watched with vague amusement, flipping the page of his magazine, but glancing over every few seconds. She ignored him. Instead, she reached for her journal, the same one she kept in her duffel since she was 13. Soft cover, half full, corners curled from time. She flipped to a blank page and started writing. First class smells different, not just because of leather seats or the hot towels. It smells like assumption, like doubt, dressed up in uniforms and fake smiles. But I'm here, hoodie and all, and I belong. She paused, then underlined the last line twice. As the plane pushed back from the gate and the safety video played, Amira leaned her head against the window. Her reflection looked back at her, calm, dark-eyed, unreadable. The hoodie draped over her shoulders like a soft shield, and for the first time that day, she let herself feel proud. Not loud, just steady. She'd walked into this space and taken her seat. No apology, no performance. And maybe that was the scariest thing of all, for them. Because when the world expects you to shrink, taking your seat is power. Staying silent is a statement. Wearing your hoodie is a story. And this story was just beginning. The cabin lights dimmed as the aircraft climbed past 10,000 feet, slicing cleanly through layers of thin white clouds. A calm hum settled across the first-class cabin, like the world had hit mute. Amira adjusted her seat slightly, letting her head rest against the cool leather. She didn't close her eyes. She never slept easily in public. Instead, she watched. The woman in 1A was flipping through a hardcover novel with a gilded spine. The older couple across from her whispered in French between sips of champagne. Flight attendants bustled softly up and down the aisle, delivering drinks on silver trays like they were performing a ceremony. And then there was Tina. Every time she passed Amira's row, something in her face changed. Barely noticeable, but real. Her polite expression stiffened. Her shoulders squared more sharply. Her eyes stayed on the tray instead of meeting Amira's. That smile she gave the white passengers, it never came Amira's way. She didn't need a confrontation to know what this was. She'd seen it before, in coffee shops, in classrooms, in checkout lines. People who couldn't quite say what they felt out loud, but who made sure you felt it anyway. That was Tina, professional, polite, and full of something Amira recognized instantly: contempt, disguised as courtesy. She tried to ignore it, pulled out her journal again, started sketching out an idea for a STEM mentorship program she'd been thinking about. Black girls teaching black girls. Hoodies in the lab, not just in the streets. Her mind began to calm. Then Tina reappeared. This time she wasn't alone. Another flight attendant followed a few steps behind. Shorter, curly hair tucked neatly under her cap, hands clasped in front of her apron. She looked younger, newer, maybe still learning the ropes. Tina leaned slightly over Amira's seat. "Miss Caldwell," she said in that measured tone, "I noticed your tray table's not fully stowed. FAA regulations require that during the climb phase." Amira blinked, glanced down. The tray was up. Locked. She looked back at Tina. "It's stowed." Tina didn't move. "I'll just check it again." She pressed the latch, confirmed what Amira already knew. Then looked at her, lips pursed. "Please be mindful of our safety guidelines," she said, loud enough for the man across the aisle to hear. "First class comes with certain expectations." Amira said nothing, but inside her, something coiled. Not anger, not fear, awareness. the kind you only build after years of being watched harder than anyone else in the room. When Tina walked away, the new attendant lingered for a beat. She didn't speak, but her eyes flicked toward Amira's hoodie, then quickly back to her own shoes. She followed Tina down the aisle like a shadow. Amira opened her journal again, wrote one line in thick black ink. Respectability doesn't protect you. They still see the hoodie first, then under it, but I wear it anyway. Somewhere over Arizona, the lights shifted to soft purple and blue. Evening mode, as the flight crew called it. Passengers began reclining, window shades lowering in unison like a practice ballet. Tina returned again, this time with snacks. She passed a bag of warm cashews to the woman in 1A, offered macadamia cookies to the man across the aisle. Then she stopped at Amira's row, hands resting on the cart. She didn't offer the basket. Instead, she looked at her clipboard, and then at Amira. "I need to see your boarding pass again," Tina said. Amira blinked slowly. "Why?" Tina kept her voice neutral. "There seems to be an issue with our manifest. Just a routine check." Amira reached for the small sleeve on her hoodie, pulled out the crumpled boarding pass, handed it over. Tina took it like she was handling a fake ID at a nightclub. Scanned it again. Green. Seat 1C. Again. Still, she didn't hand it back right away. "Thank you," she said, but not like she meant it. She placed the pass back on Amira's tray, softly but like she was returning something that didn't belong. Then she moved on. Amira stared at the boarding pass for a long time. Not because she questioned it, because she understood something deeper now. This wasn't about a seat or a tray table. This was about presence, about who's allowed to occupy space without permission, and who has to prove themselves over and over again. She sat back, folded her arms, and let the cabin return to stillness. The hoodie, now tucked behind her back, felt heavier than usual. Not from shame, but from the weight of being watched. Amira didn't sleep, not because she wasn't tired. Her body was heavy from a full summer of labs, late nights, and early morning lectures. Not because the cabin wasn't quiet, it was hushed, lit in soft blues that made everything feel like a dream. She stayed awake because she learned that rest wasn't always safe. Not when you were the only black girl in first class wearing a hoodie. Not when eyes lingered too long. Not when routine checks were repeated more than once. And not when someone like Tina Hawkins had already made up her mind about you. The woman in 1A snored lightly. A businessman across the aisle tapped on his laptop with the kind of focus reserved for last-minute investors. The new flight attendant had disappeared behind the curtain, separating coach from first. Amira sat motionless, but her mind spun. She could feel it happening again. That slow turn. The shift from quiet disapproval to something more deliberate. She'd seen it back in middle school, when a teacher accidentally lowered her math grade, until her mom showed up with the printed test and the principal had to backpedal. She'd seen it in the department store, when a cashier asked to double-check the card she was using, even though it had her name on it and she'd just bought a calculator at the electronics counter. She knew the signs. First comes the doubt, then comes the narrative. Somewhere around the second hour of the flight, Tina returned. No tray cart this time. Just a phone in her hand and a polite smile stretched across her face like a mask too small. "Miss Caldwell," she said, "I'd like to ask you a quick question." Amira glanced up from her journal. "Yes. Do you know someone by the name of—" Tina glanced at her phone. "Miles Caldwell?" Amira's stomach didn't turn. She didn't flinch. "Yes," she said. "He's my father." Tina nodded slowly, but her smile had changed. "Interesting," she said, as if Amira had just admitted to inventing the name. "Why?" Tina shrugged lightly. "Just curious. I've heard the name before. Very important man." Amira didn't respond. She wasn't about to fill in the gaps. If Tina wanted to play games, she could play them by herself. But Tina leaned in closer, lowering her voice. "Must be nice," she said softly. To have someone with power look out for you? Amira raised her eyebrows just slightly. Is there something you're implying? Tina leaned back, putting both hands behind her clipboard now. Of course not, she said, with that sugar-slick tone again. Just saying it's good to have support, especially when you don't look like you belong somewhere. And there it was. The strike had landed, not loud, not direct, but precise, calculated. Amira didn't say anything. Not yet. She wasn't going to give Tina what she wanted. Emotion, anger, protest. That's how they win, by provoking a scene and pretending it justifies the suspicion they had all along. So she did what she always did when she was younger, walking the halls at her old charter school while teachers trailed her like shadows. She held her silence, and she sharpened it like a blade. Tina didn't like that. The rest of the flight felt longer than it was. Every 30 minutes, Tina seemed to pass by again, checking Amira's seatbelt, checking her tray, checking her expression, always with a smile, always with that flight attendant grace that made her untouchable to casual observers. No one else noticed, because to them, it looked like good service. But Amira wasn't confused. She wasn't being served. She was being studied, measured, watched. As they neared descent, the new flight attendant reappeared, her hands fiddling with the curtain tie, eyes darting nervously toward Amira. She approached quietly, then paused. I'm sorry, she whispered. Amira looked up. The girl looked uncomfortable, torn. She asked me to pull your name again, she continued. From the manifest. She said you might be flying under someone else's credentials. Amira blinked. Once. Twice. Then she laughed. A single breathy sound. Not because it was funny, but because it was so painfully familiar. She's wrong, Amira said simply. The new girl nodded. I know. And then she walked away. The plane dipped gently toward the lights of Atlanta. Amira sat back in her seat, one hand resting on her journal, the other curled loosely under the sleeve of her hoodie. She could already feel the moment building. The next strike was coming, and she wasn't going to be the one who flinched first. 25 minutes to landing. The captain's voice came through the intercom, casual and warm. Ladies and gentlemen, we've begun our descent into Atlanta. Local time is 6:42 p.m. Us and the skies are clear, and the temperature is a comfortable 75 degrees. The cabin light shifted to a soft amber glow. Most passengers stirred, adjusting recline angles, snapping shut tablets, retightening seatbelts. The businessman across from Amira shoved his laptop into a leather briefcase, finally done pretending not to watch her. Amira didn't move. She sat with her hands calmly folded in her lap, eyes fixed on the curtain ahead. Her hoodie was still on, slightly rumpled from hours of leaning against the window. She could feel the weight of it now, not just the fabric, but what it symbolized, the silent assumption, the automatic suspicion. The hoodie wasn't a garment, it was a trigger, not for her, for everyone else. Tina's voice cut through the quiet. Ladies and gentlemen, please ensure all personal items are stowed securely. We'll be coming through for a final compliance check. Her heels clicked softly down the aisle. Amira closed her eyes for a brief moment, steadying her breath. She knew what was coming, and she was right. Tina stopped at row 1. I'm sorry, she said, this time without the sweetness. But I'll need to ask for your ID again? Miss Caldwell. Amira opened her eyes. You already scanned my boarding pass. Twice. Tina smiled, tight-lipped. Yes, but it's a matter of protocol now. We've been informed of a potential discrepancy regarding seat assignments and identity confirmation. Just a formality. The lie didn't even try to hide. Amira didn't flinch. From whom? Tina blinked. Pardon? Who informed you? Amira asked, her voice calm and even. Because I haven't left this seat. I haven't moved. And no one else seems to be having their identity rechecked. The businessman across the aisle pretended to be deeply invested in adjusting his neck pillow. Tina shifted slightly. It's just a precaution, she said. Amira looked her directly in the eye. No, it's a pattern. There was a pause, a short, electric silence between them. And then Amira reached down slowly, pulled her passport from her backpack, and placed it on the tray table. The navy blue cover shimmered faintly in the light. Tina took it like it might bite her, flipped it open. Read the name. Amira Elise Caldwell, U.S. citizen. Then she looked at the photo and paused. She looked again. The same eyes, same face, same hoodie. But suddenly, Tina wasn't so sure of herself. Not because the passport was wrong, but because at the bottom of the page, pushed it in a thin formal line, was a special annotation, small but unmistakable. Clearance. FIEE, privileged traveler, parental sponsor, Miles Caldwell, Nova Sky, Administrative Board. Tina's fingers stiffened. She looked up. Amira tilted her head just slightly. Is that enough confirmation for you? Tina said nothing. Her face said everything. She handed back the passport. Thank you, she mumbled, then turned on her heel. Amira didn't watch her walk away. She didn't need to. The plane began its final descent. Wheels down, cabin vibrating faintly from the shift in altitude. But for Amira, it wasn't the landing that felt most significant. It was the fact that she was still sitting there, unbothered, unreadable, and undefeated. Let them stare, let them whisper, let them doubt. She wasn't going to fold because someone didn't like the fabric she wore. The wheels screeched softly against the tarmac. The plane slowed, taxiing toward the gate. Seatbelt signs blinked off. Passengers unbuckled. Bags were pulled down from overhead bins. The businessman across from her finally stood up and looked at her. Really looked at her. Didn't realize who your dad was, he said, his voice low, like it was a compliment. Amira looked him straight in the eye. You didn't need to. Then she stood, pulled her hoodie over her head, not off, just higher, and walked off that plane the same way she'd walked on, with quiet, with presence, and with power that didn't ask permission. The moment Amira stepped off the plane, the Georgia humidity wrapped around her like a second skin, sticky, thick, and familiar. She hadn't even made it to baggage claim yet, and already she could feel Atlanta breathing again. But the tightness in her chest hadn't left with the altitude. She pulled her hoodie down just enough to keep her face visible for the security cameras. Nova Sky Airport was her father's house in more ways than one, but she'd learned early. Being the owner's daughter doesn't shield you from someone else's prejudice, and it definitely didn't shield you from people like Tina Hawkins. Tina hadn't spoken another word after that last ID check. She kept her distance, working the back of the plane as if Amira had become toxic, too dangerous to touch, too proud to provoke again. But Amira could feel it. The storm wasn't over. It had just moved outside the aircraft. At the exit gate, passengers streamed out toward the terminal. Some stopped to check their phones. Others moved quickly, dragging roller bags and rejoining loved ones with open arms. Amira walked alone. She was used to it. Head high, hoodie on, eyes forward. She didn't notice Tina at first. She wasn't supposed to be there. Flight attendants didn't usually follow passengers off the plane unless something had gone wrong. But as Amira turned the corner toward Concourse B, she saw her. Not in uniform now. She'd changed into civilian clothes, a blazer and slacks, still polished, still precise, still watching. She stood near the information desk, whispering something to a uniformed airport staffer. Her fingers tapped lightly against the desk. Her voice was low, but her posture was tight, like she was preparing to strike a match. Amira slowed her pace. What is she doing? Why is she still here? And then, like clockwork, 3 transportation security officers approached. 1 in front, 2 behind, blocking her path. Excuse me, miss, the lead officer said, holding out a hand. Can we see your ID, please? Amira froze. People around them paused. Not for long, but long enough. A few eyes darted her way. Phones came out. Whispers started. Her mind immediately flashed to her boarding pass, her passport, her father's name, everything she'd already proven, everything that should have kept this from happening. She reached into her pocket slowly, careful not to make any sudden moves. "What's the issue?" she asked, voice steady. The officer glanced at a tablet in his hand. "We received a report of a passenger attempting to access first class using someone else's credentials. Description matches you?" And there it was, the public version of what Tina had been implying all along. Now spoken aloud, now official. She handed over her passport again. The officer examined it, his brows knit slightly. He looked at the screen, then back at her, then over his shoulder toward Tina. Amira turned too, and Tina, she was smiling, not openly, just the corner of her mouth slightly lifted, like she was watching a script she'd written play out exactly as planned. The officer looked uncomfortable now. "We'll need to ask you to step aside for a few more questions." Amira glanced around. A small crowd was forming, people pretending not to watch but clearly interested. She felt the eyes again, the hoodie, the skin, the silence. It was all they needed to believe the worst, and Tina had known that. Security officer gestured toward a nearby inspection booth. Amira followed. No cuffs, no shouting, just enough to humiliate her without triggering a lawsuit. That's how it worked now. Soft racism, polished, professional, with just enough deniability to keep a job. Amira sat on the metal chair inside the booth, heart pounding but face calm. She'd learned not to show fear. The officer cleared his throat. "We're running your information now. Can you confirm your father's name for the record?" She stared at him for a long moment, then said, "Miles Caldwell, chairman of the Nova Sky Administrative Board. I can call him right now if you'd like." The officer's hand stopped mid-typing. "You're—" "Yes," she said. "That's why I was in seat 1C. He swallowed. "Understood. One moment." 5 minutes later, he returned, face pale, posture stiffer. "You're free to go, Miss Caldwell. Apologies for the confusion." She stood slowly, passport back in her hand, backpack slung over one shoulder. As she walked past him, she paused just long enough to ask, "Who filed the complaint?" The officer hesitated, then said it. "Tina Hawkins, lead flight attendant, Flight 278. Amira didn't say a word. She didn't need to, because now she knew exactly what kind of story this was becoming. And it wasn't just hers anymore. It was bigger than a hoodie. It was bigger than one flight. It was the black story they thought they could bury beneath silence. But not this time. Concourse B of Nova Sky International was always busy. Echoes of rolling luggage blended with sharp airport announcements and the occasional squeal of reunited families. People rushed. People waited. No one expected to be part of a story until one starts unfolding in front of them. Amira stepped out of the inspection booth. Her hoodie was still on, her face still composed, but inside, a quiet fire had started. She spotted Tina still near the information desk, phone to her ear, back straight like a soldier reporting for duty. When Tina noticed her, she turned, just enough to make eye contact. And for a brief, frozen second, Amira saw it all. The look of a woman who thought she'd just taught someone a lesson, a smirk barely hidden under professionalism, the triumph of someone who used the system not to protect passengers, but to put someone in their place. That look didn't last, because as Tina turned, so did a dozen others. Travelers, passers-by, employees. They all saw the black girl in the hoodie being pulled aside, and now they were watching her return, calm, unbroken, walking alone. And they looked at Tina, too. The air was shifting. Amira didn't head straight for baggage claim. She made a deliberate turn, walked right toward the desk where Tina was standing. She stopped exactly 3 feet away. Tina ended her call abruptly. "Miss Caldwell," she began, voice dipped in false concern. "I'm glad everything was cleared up. It was just—" "A misunderstanding," Amira interrupted. Tina blinked. Yes, exactly. In a high-security environment, we're trained to profile, a pause, a tight smile from Tina. Now let's not turn this into something it isn't. Amira tilted her head just slightly. I didn't say it was anything. You did. And around them the ripple started. People slowed down. Phones tilted up. A camera flash blinked in the distance. The story was writing itself, and now the terminal was reading. Tina shifted on her heels, suddenly aware of the attention. This is not an appropriate place for a discussion, she said. If you'd like to file a complaint, oh, I will. The tone in Amira's voice didn't rise. It didn't crack, but it carried. Not loud, but enough. Do you know how many times I've been stopped in airports? She said. Not just to Tina anymore. How many times I've been pulled out of line, randomly selected, questioned twice as hard as the person behind me? She turned slowly, her voice clear. I've been mistaken for someone else, assumed to be using someone else's ticket, and now apparently being the daughter of the man who owns this airline still isn't enough to not be treated like a threat. Gasps weren't loud, but they came. Tina's eyes widened. I didn't know. You didn't care? It was like the terminal paused. The man from Amira's flight stood frozen a few yards away, jaw slightly open. The woman from 1A was checking her phone, watching, and then came the voice from behind. Firm, measured. Amira. She turned. A tall black man in a tailored navy suit walked toward them. Smooth gait, silver beard. The kind of presence that made people stand up straighter without knowing why. Miles Caldwell. He didn't run, didn't rush. He walked with the confidence of someone who owned every square foot his shoes touched. And in many ways he did. Tina stiffened immediately. Mr. Caldwell, I had no idea. Miles didn't look at her. He looked at his daughter. You all right? Amira nodded. Now I am. He turned slowly and finally met Tina's eyes. You filed a false report against my daughter, he said, voice calm but sharp enough to cut glass. Escorted her out in front of other passengers. Questioned her identity. Is that correct? Tina stammered. I followed protocol. There was a concern. No, he said. You followed bias, not protocol. The words echoed, and no one in that terminal could unhear them. Tina glanced around, realizing how many eyes were on her now. How many phones? Her smile wavered. Her breath quickened. She opened her mouth, but Miles raised a hand. You don't need to explain. You've said enough today. He turned to Amira. Let's get your bag. Amira nodded and turned to walk beside him. And just before they disappeared into the crowd, she glanced back at Tina one last time. Not with anger, with clarity, the kind that said, you chose the wrong story to try and erase. And now, the whole terminal had seen it. The baggage claim carousel hummed to life with a mechanical clunk and a blinking yellow light. Luggage began to slide down the chute like lazy raindrops, thudding softly onto the conveyor belt as travelers leaned forward, searching for familiar shapes. Amira stood slightly apart from the crowd, not hiding, just existing in her own calm, heavy silence. Her father stood next to her, tall and composed, hands folded lightly in front of him. No one said much. They didn't need to. The air between them carried years of shared understanding about airports, about prejudice, about power, especially silent power. Across the terminal, Tina Hawkins hadn't moved. She stood near the wall now, speaking quietly with a younger Nova Sky supervisor in a navy blazer. The supervisor nodded at intervals, but her jaw was tight, her tablet out. She was taking notes. Her eyes occasionally drifted toward Amira, then back to Tina. The smirk was gone. So was the confidence, because Tina wasn't the story anymore. She was the cautionary tale. And every person who had witnessed the confrontation, they were now participants in something larger, a subtle shifting of weight, a collective realization. They hadn't seen a disruptive passenger. They'd seen a black girl in a hoodie get humiliated for daring to be first class. Amira's duffel appeared on the carousel. She stepped forward, grabbed it, and slung it over her shoulder. "I could have handled it alone," she said, voice soft. "I know," Miles answered, "but sometimes they need to see we don't stand alone." She nodded. He reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a card. A plain white rectangle, embossed with his name and a phone number in black serif font. He didn't hand it to her. He handed it to the Nova Sky supervisor now approaching them. "This is not the first time," he said, "but I expect it to be the last." The supervisor, early 30s, sharp eyes, dark skin, took the card with a quick nod. She looked at Amira, then back at Miles. "I saw the video," she said, "and I saw the report Tina filed." Her jaw clenched. "I'm sorry." Amira nodded. "Thank you." That was all. Outside, the air had cooled. Dusk was falling over Atlanta, painting the clouds in soft indigo and streaks of fire orange. The terminal lights flickered on overhead. Cars pulled up and pulled away. Honks, greetings, hugs, life resumed. Miles unlocked the Tesla with a soft chime. The doors lifted open like quiet wings. Before Amira climbed in, she took one last glance at the terminal. She didn't feel triumphant. She didn't feel vindicated. She felt real, grounded, like every inch of her skin and bone and hoodie had been weighed by the world and still came out standing. As they drove off, Amira rested her head against the window, watching the neon-lit roads slide past. "I almost lost it," she said quietly. "In that booth, when they said it was a security concern, I knew what it was. They just didn't want to say it out loud." Miles kept his eyes on the road. "They never do." "I didn't yell," she added. "You didn't need to." She smiled faintly. "Mom would have cussed someone out." He chuckled. "That's why she's banned from 3 airports." Amira laughed, really laughed for the first time that day. They pulled up to the family home just as porch lights flickered on. The screen door creaked open. A younger girl, about 13, darted out barefoot, hair in a puffball, arms wide. "Amira!" She dropped her duffel and caught the girl in a tight hug, spinning her around once before setting her down. The porch light caught the edge of her hoodie. Still on, still hers. Later that night, Amira sat on her bed, legs crossed, journal open. She flipped past the scrawled equations and margin doodles, past the page where she'd written the words, "Respectability doesn't protect you." She found a blank page, picked up her pen, and wrote, "Today the world looked at my hoodie like it was a threat, but I never raised my voice, never threw a fit. I didn't have to scream to be heard. They heard me anyway. And more important, they saw me." She closed the journal, set it beside her pillow, and finally let herself rest. Because she knew the humiliation wasn't the end. It was the beginning of a story they couldn't rewrite. And this black story in a quiet hoodie had just gone public. The next morning, Amira woke to a screen full of fire. Not literal flames, digital ones. Her phone buzzed with a non-stop feed of notifications, mentions, tags, messages from people she hadn't talked to in years. Group chats that had been dead for months were suddenly exploding with, "Girl, is this you? OMG, I just saw the video." Tina's going down. This story is everywhere. She sat up, heart pounding as she unlocked the screen. And there it was. A grainy video taken from the far side of Concourse B with the caption, "Flight attendant falsely accuses black girl in hoodie. Turns out her dad owns the airline. Hashtag hoodie power." The video had over 240,000 views and counting. It showed everything. Tina calling security, Amira being pulled aside, the confrontation, her father's arrival. The line, "You followed bias, not protocol," a line now being retweeted across the internet like scripture. People in the comments were outraged. This is why we document everything. She was calm, classy, and still got treated like a criminal. Hoodie doesn't equal threat. Learn it. She didn't even have to yell. That's the scariest part. But not everyone was on her side. Some of the replies twisted the facts, probably faked the story for attention, entitled Rich Kid Playing Victim. Bet she didn't act so calm before the camera started rolling. It didn't surprise Amira, but it still stung. Downstairs, her dad was already dressed. Crisp button-up shirt, coffee in hand, standing by the kitchen counter as if he'd been waiting. He was watching CNN. And there she was, on the screen. Blurry video, clear message. Teenage daughter of airline executive racially profiled on Nova Sky flight. Airline launches internal review. Amira stared at the TV, then turned to her father. You didn't say it made the news. He sipped his coffee. I didn't want it to define your morning. She crossed her arms. It kind of already did. He nodded. I know. The doorbell rang. Her dad's eyes shifted instantly. Not in fear, in calculation. He opened the door slowly to find a man and woman standing there. Polished, stiff posture, ID badges already out. Good morning. We're with the FAA Compliance and Ethics Division. We'd like a word. Miles didn't flinch. You found the right house. They stepped inside, glancing around like they were measuring the weight of silence. Amira stayed near the stairwell, just out of direct view, hoodie still on. Listening. The woman, mid-40s, sharp red blazer, spoke first. We're conducting a formal inquiry into the incident at Gate B14. Ms. Hawkins filed an incident report accusing your daughter of boarding fraud. Amira's chest tightened. Fraud? The man added. She alleges that Amira impersonated a VIP to gain access to first class and, this is quoted, used her father's influence after being caught. Miles turned to look at his daughter, his face unreadable, then back to the agents. That's a lie, he said, and she knew it was a lie when she filed it. The woman nodded. We're aware, which is why we're here. Amira stepped forward then, not hiding anymore. The agents looked surprised to see her so calm. I have everything, she said. Emails, booking confirmation, the original seat assignment in my name. I didn't impersonate anyone. I just wore a hoodie. The male agent exhaled slowly. That seems to be the core issue here. They exchanged glances. Then the woman spoke again. You may want to retain representation. Ms. Hawkins has doubled down. She's now alleging verbal aggression, possible intimidation tactics, and that she felt threatened by your presence. Amira blinked, her voice sharp and flat. She's lying. The agent nodded. We know. But outside, the lie was already moving. A tweet had gone viral with Tina's statement leaked. I was simply doing my job. I didn't feel safe. The passenger in question became confrontational, and I made a judgment call in the interest of safety. People were debating it now. Even news anchors were both siding it. Was it racism or just a misunderstanding? Amira slammed her phone down on the table. I didn't do anything, she said. I was quiet, respectful. I followed every rule. Her dad put a hand on her shoulder. I know, he said, but rules don't protect us. We do. And for the first time, Amira saw something in her father's face that didn't look like calm. It looked like resolve. Because this wasn't just about one flight. It was about drawing a line. And now, someone had crossed it. The Caldwell house wasn't quiet anymore. Calls buzzed on speakerphones in the den. Laptops lit up across the long walnut dining table. Miles Caldwell, normally a man who handled business behind closed doors, was now the calm center of a storm, fielding phone calls from lawyers, board members, and Nova Sky's internal affairs team. Amira watched him from the staircase, hoodie sleeves wrapped around her thumbs like bandages. Her father didn't shout. He didn't pace, but he moved with a stillness that could shake empires. A reporter had left a voicemail that morning, then 5 more. Can Amira confirm the accusations against her are false? Does she plan to sue the airline her father oversees? Is this a case of racial profiling Or just miscommunication? And then the worst one. Does she feel like she used her father's position to avoid consequences? Amira almost laughed at that one. Avoid consequences? The only consequence she'd ever asked for was respect. And even that seemed too much for Tina. By noon, the hashtag Hoodie in First Class was trending in 5 states. People were picking sides. Some defended Amira, reposting the video of her calm confrontation. Others quoted Tina's false statement and painted Amira as entitled, dangerous, rude. One tweet read, "If she hadn't been the CEO's daughter, this wouldn't even be a story." Another replied, "And that's the point. It happened because she was wearing a hoodie and in spite of who her dad was." She read them all, then turned her phone off. Not because she couldn't handle it, because she didn't know the internet any more of her piece. Downstairs, Miles was on the phone with the FAA again. "No," he said flatly. "I'm not interested in an internal-only resolution. If your compliance division found her report intentionally false, then you need to suspend her." Pause and issue a public correction. Another pause. He exhaled through his nose, the way he did when someone was about to be professionally erased. "My daughter was humiliated in your airport, on my plane. We will not pretend this is a training issue." Click. Amira finally came downstairs. Miles looked up. "You ready?" he asked. She frowned. "For what?" He handed her a navy blue folder. Inside, a printed statement, written in clean, direct language. It was calm, truthful, unapologetic. At the top, Amira E. Caldwell, official response. "I want you to read it at tomorrow's board meeting," he said. Amira blinked. "They want me to speak?" "No, I do." She stared at the page. "You sure this isn't too personal?" He met her gaze. "It is personal. That's why they need to hear it." Later that afternoon, a breaking news alert popped up. Nova Sky Airlines places senior flight attendant Tina Hawkins on administrative leave pending full investigation. But it didn't change everything. Not yet, because Tina had already gone on a podcast. Amira listened to it through her headphones, lying flat on her bed, arms crossed. The host was all sympathy, all soft leading questions. And Tina, oh Tina, played the victim like a trained actress. "I was scared," she said. "She was cold. She wouldn't talk to me. She looked angry." The word hung in the air. Angry, as if black silence equaled threat, as if calm is criminal. Amira paused the audio. She stared at the ceiling for a long time, then reached under her pillow, pulled out her journal and wrote, "They don't want you to fight, they want you to react. So they can point and say, 'See, she was the problem all along.'" Downstairs, her dad sat on the patio, phone to his ear. But this call was different, softer, more deliberate. It was to the chair of the Nova Sky Board. And when he spoke, he didn't ask. He instructed. "Yes, she'll speak at the meeting tomorrow. No, this won't be swept under HR's rug. And when she does, I expect full support from the Executive Council, not just for her, but for every black passenger who's ever walked into first class and been met with suspicion instead of service." Silence on the other end, then understood. The line had been crossed, not when they questioned her ID, not when they filed the false report, not even when they dragged her reputation into the news cycle. The line was crossed when they tried to silence her story. And now, her father had made space. The mic would be hers. And this black story in a hoodie wasn't going to be whispered anymore. Morning broke with rain, not the soft kind, the kind that hit the pavement hard and bounced, sharp and stinging, like the world was reminding everyone it still had power. Amira stood at the window, hoodie sleeves tugged down over her fists. Across the street, early commuters darted through puddles. Traffic lights blinked red against the wet asphalt. Downstairs, her dad's black SUV waited in the driveway. Behind the wheel was Marcus, the family's longtime driver and former Air Force pilot, whose steady hand had once landed a burning helicopter and never bragged about it once. "You good?" Miles asked from the kitchen. Amira didn't answer right away. Instead, she touched the small fold of her hoodie, soft from years of wear, resilient from years of use. Then she turned. "I'm ready." The Nova Sky Executive Board met on the 14th floor of a tower that overlooked the entire Atlanta skyline. The conference room had floor-to-ceiling glass, leather chairs that didn't squeak, and more money sitting at that long table than most cities saw in a year. Amira had never been up there. She'd heard stories, her father's stories mostly, quiet ones, backdoor meetings, policies signed without questions, deals whispered into existence over finger sandwiches and firm handshakes. Today, she wasn't there to whisper. The room was full. 10 board members, 2 PR reps, a company attorney, and the Nova Sky CEO, a tall man in his 60s with frosty hair, who stood when Miles and Amira entered. "Mr. Caldwell, Miss Caldwell, thank you for coming." Miles nodded but didn't sit. "This is Amira's floor today," he said. "She'll speak first." Eyes turned toward her. Some polite, some skeptical, some quietly calculating. None of them ready. Amira stepped forward, pulled the folded statement from her hoodie pocket, unfolded it slowly. Her voice didn't shake. "Good morning. My name is Amira Elise Caldwell. I am 17 years old. I recently returned from a summer science fellowship at Caltech, where I was one of the youngest students accepted in their advanced program." Pause. Not for drama, for clarity. "On September 3rd, I boarded Nova Sky Flight 278 with a first-class ticket booked in my name. I wore jeans, sneakers, and a navy hoodie. I was questioned. Twice. Pulled aside. Escorted out of the gate. Accused of impersonation. My presence was treated as a threat." She let the last word breathe, then continued. "I said nothing at the time. Not because I agreed, but because I have learned that when a black girl raises her voice, the story becomes her reaction, not the injustice." The room was still. Tina Hawkins' name never came out of her mouth. She didn't have to say it. What mattered was the system that let someone like Tina feel safe making the accusation. The system that almost believed her without proof. The one that tried to twist silence into guilt and calm into criminality. "I have learned to walk softly," Amira said, eyes meeting each board member in turn. "But that doesn't mean I walk alone. I am not asking for pity. I'm asking for accountability. And finally, I wore a hoodie. And the world saw that before they saw me. But I'm not ashamed of that. My hoodie isn't the problem. Your assumptions are." When she finished, no one clapped. This wasn't a rally, it was a reckoning. The CEO stood again. "We'll review everything," he said, immediately. "No," Miles interrupted. "You'll respond. Today, publicly." The CEO hesitated, then nodded. And just like that, the balance in the room shifted. 2 hours later, Nova Sky Airlines issued a formal apology. They acknowledged racial bias in the incident. They confirmed that the internal report filed by Tina Hawkins was inaccurate and unprofessional. They announced her termination. And they closed with a sentence Amira would never forget. "We are committed to making first class a place where presence is not policed and dignity is not conditional." The news spread fast, faster than the lie, faster than the silence, faster than Tina's podcast. Because truth, when told with clarity, cuts through louder than spectacle. That night, Amira sat at her desk, laptop open, hoodie still on. She clicked upload on her new blog post titled, "I Sat in Seat 1C. Here's what that really meant." And in the first paragraph, she wrote, "They thought I was angry, but I was focused. They thought I was hiding, but I was thinking. They thought I didn't belong, but I was already home." Long before the hashtags, the retweets, the statements, and the news anchors trying to pronounce her name like they cared, Miles Caldwell was already a quiet force. He didn't have a Wikipedia page. He didn't give interviews. But in the boardrooms where real decisions got made, when his name came up, people sat up straighter. He wasn't famous. He was respected. And in certain circles of the airline industry, he was feared. Because Miles never made noise. He made moves. When Amira was still learning to ride a bike, her dad was sitting across from billionaires with his elbows on mahogany conference tables, teaching them how logistics could save them millions. His face was never on a billboard, but his fingerprints were all over the airline infrastructure that moved half of America across the sky. When she was 10 and lost her first science fair, he didn't tell her to smile through it. He said, "You don't need to be palatable. You need to be undeniable." That was who Miles Caldwell had always been. A shadow, a strategist, a man who let others underestimate him until it cost them. And now they'd underestimated his daughter. They thought she was just a teenager in a hoodie. They thought she would fold quietly under shame. They thought, even after learning her last name, that they could twist the story and walk away untouched. They forgot where she came from. The morning after the board meeting, the world woke up to a new headline. Breaking. Airline executive Miles Caldwell calls for cultural overhaul after racial profiling incident. But this wasn't a leak. It wasn't an anonymous source. It was a press conference, called by Miles himself, not through the airline's media department, through his own private office, a move that made reporters scramble and Nova Sky's lawyers sweat. The press gathered outside the glass and steel headquarters in Atlanta, cameras pointed at a small black podium. No branded backdrop, no flags, just Miles. He stepped up in a storm gray blazer, black shirt, no tie. His wedding ring caught the sunlight. His expression was unreadable. Behind him stood no entourage, no spokesperson, just a girl behind the mirrored windows above, watching quietly. Amira. He adjusted the mic once, then spoke. "Thank you for coming," he said, voice calm, paced. "I'll keep this brief. I won't be taking questions." The crowd of reporters went still. I've spent 25 years building systems most people don't notice. Gate networks, scheduling algorithms, route efficiency models. My name doesn't appear on terminals or in in-flight magazines, but the planes take off because I've made sure they can. He paused. And this week, one of those planes carried my daughter. Cameras clicked. Someone in the back whispered to their colleague. Miles went on. She flew with a ticket in her name. She sat in the seat we paid for. She wore a hoodie. And because of that, she was pulled aside, questioned, accused, and humiliated. A gust of wind fluttered papers in the crowd. "But here's what matters more than the incident," he said. "It's the response." He looked directly into the center camera. No one apologized until people got angry online. No one corrected the record until the lie went viral. And the person who started all this filed a false report, misused her authority, and then played the victim, was protected, right up until the headlines made her inconvenient. His voice didn't rise, but the shame in the room did. This is not about my daughter's last name. It's about what happens to Black children when they don't have one that makes people nervous. He leaned forward slightly. When Amira was pulled aside, no one asked questions. No one gave her the benefit of the doubt, because she didn't look like who they expected in seat 1C. More camera clicks. A few journalists nodded slowly. This isn't just about her. It's about the fact that every hoodie walking through an airport is read as a risk first and a person second. Miles stepped back from the mic slightly, then closed. "So let me be clear. This won't be handled internally, not quietly, not eventually, because silence doesn't fix bias, and training doesn't fix culture. Action does." He nodded once, turned, and walked away. Not hurried, not smiling, just steady, like the ground already knew to make way for him. Inside, Amira stood with her arms folded, looking down from the mirrored glass. She didn't smile, but something in her eyes settled, because her father hadn't defended her with volume. He defended her with truth. And now the world couldn't say they didn't know who she was, because behind her hoodie was the shadow they tried to ignore. And now, he was awake. The moment Miles Caldwell stepped off that podium, the ground began to shift. Not just in the media, though that happened too, fast and furious. It shifted inside Nova Sky's own walls, inside its corporate elevators, in Slack channels and private email threads. Because no one expected the man who'd kept silent for 25 years to suddenly speak, let alone speak with such precision, purpose, and power. In the next 24 hours, here's what changed. 1. Tina Hawkins' lawyer dropped her as a client. The podcast host who gave her the spotlight issued an apology. Quiet, but real. He deleted the episode. 2. Nova Sky's diversity and equity department tripled in budget. Not as a PR move, as a directive signed off by every board member who had sat across from Amira in that conference room and seen something they couldn't unsee. 3. A national conversation reignited. The phrase first class while black trended for 2 days. Not because it was catchy, because it was true. Meanwhile, Amira stayed quiet. No interviews, no morning talk shows. She went back to her life, back to the kitchen where her little sister watched cartoons with cereal milk on her chin, back to the lab project she'd started before the flight even happened, an AI model for air traffic delay prediction. She wasn't trying to become famous. She was trying to finish her work. But work didn't ignore her. It followed. On Thursday, an email came through from the Caltech Fellowship Director. We saw the story. You handled yourself with dignity. Would you consider speaking at our fall symposium? You'll be the only undergraduate featured. 5 minutes later, another ping from a civil rights foundation. Our education initiative for Black girls in STEM is looking for student ambassadors. You'd be perfect. Then one from a teacher at her old high school in Atlanta. My students are talking about you, about how you stayed calm. You gave them something to believe in. She stared at the screen, then slowly closed her laptop. It was happening. Her name, her hoodie, had become a symbol, but symbols carry weight. And Amira wasn't sure if she was ready to carry it. Her father noticed. That night, they sat out on the porch. Just the two of them, wrapped in George's humid quiet and the soft creak of wooden boards beneath their chairs. You thinking about speaking? He asked. She nodded once. It's a lot. He didn't answer right away. Then he said, you know, I didn't speak up when they rejected me from that country club, or when I found out I was being paid half what the other board members made. Why not? Because I was building something. I knew one day they'd have to deal with me anyway. Amira turned to him. And now? He looked at her, smile slow and proud. Now I realize silence can only take you so far. At some point, your story has to walk out the front door. The next day, Amira stood in front of her bathroom mirror. Hoodie zipped halfway up, hair braided back into a clean bun. She looked at herself, not for vanity, for grounding. Behind her, the world was changing, but her reflection, still that same Black girl, still quiet, still steady, still dangerous to people who'd rather not see her. She grabbed her notebook, the one with all the quotes and the pages of equations and those 5 words she'd written over and over again since this began. Let them underestimate the hoodie. Then she picked up her phone and texted her dad. Amira, I'll speak at the symposium. Let's make it count. His reply came almost instantly. Miles, you already have. That night, the family sat down for dinner. Fried chicken, collard greens, sweet potatoes. The kind of dinner that says you made it through something. Miles offered a toast, lifting his glass of lemonade. To Amira, for reminding the world that silence isn't surrender, and that a hoodie is never a reason to doubt someone's brilliance. Her little sister raised her glass of apple juice like it was champagne. To first class, she said. Everyone laughed, and for the first time in days, Amira did too. Not because the battle was over, but because she finally realized her story wasn't just hers anymore. It had become a map, and people were following it. 3 days after the press conference, Miles Caldwell walked into Nova Sky headquarters, not as a guest, not as a negotiator, but as the man who built the foundation they were standing on. He didn't carry papers. He didn't bring lawyers. He brought a memory, one the board had forgotten. But now he was there to help them remember. The executive boardroom had been reset. Cool air conditioning, filtered water bottles, and chairs arranged in a false semicircle of equality. But the dynamic had changed. Before Miles even sat down, every executive in the room stood. Even the CEO. He didn't tell them to, but they did. Because power isn't always declared. Sometimes it just walks in wearing cufflinks. "Thank you for meeting with me," Miles said calmly. "This isn't a follow-up to my daughter's case. That's already being handled. This is about what happens next." He pulled out a small Navy notebook, unfolded a single page, and began reading. In the last fiscal year, Nova Sky saw an increase in executive bonuses, a 14% bump in investor profit shares, and a 2.3% drop in employee diversity metrics across senior levels. He looked up. Silence. "We hired 3 new directors. None were women. None were black." A few heads shifted, not in surprise, in shame. In the customer complaint records over the past 5 years, 67% of suspicious passenger alerts were filed against black and brown flyers. Only 12% of them resulted in confirmed policy violations. He folded the paper, let it rest on the table like a quiet indictment, then said, "I am not asking for change. I am offering a choice." The CEO leaned forward. "Miles, what exactly are you proposing?" Miles smiled. "Just a little. Not warm, not cold, just precise. I want 3 things," he said. 1, a permanent equity and passenger protection division that reports directly to the board, not PR. 2, a scholarship fund for black girls pursuing aerospace, named not after me, but after my daughter. And 3, he paused, then looked each board member in the eye. "I want every flight attendant, supervisor, and frontline employee retrained, not with slideshows and buzzwords, with real accountability, and I'll oversee it." The room was still. Then the CEO asked the question everyone else was too afraid to say aloud. "And if we say no?" Miles leaned back. And that was when they remembered. He wasn't just an investor. He wasn't just the father of that girl in the hoodie. He was the man who built the digital systems behind their entire operations. Scheduling, ticketing, emergency rerouting. He could walk away and take the architecture with him. He didn't raise his voice, didn't threaten. He just reminded them what would happen if he left the table. 30 minutes later, the vote was unanimous. Every request granted. No one cheered, they just exhaled. Because when the shadow wakes, no one claps. They comply. Later that night, back at home, Amira sat cross-legged on her bed, hoodie sleeves pulled over her palms. She was staring at her laptop screen. The Caltech symposium organizers had just sent the flyer mock-up. Her photo was there. Center panel. Above the words, Amira Caldwell. Redefining quiet power. She stared at it, then whispered to herself, "Dad did that." Her phone buzzed. A new message from Miles. "Miles, system fixed. Your move." She didn't reply. She just smiled, then turned her hoodie hood up and started typing her speech. In the quiet of his study, Miles closed his notebook and placed it back on the shelf. He looked at the small photo framed by his desk. Amira at age 5, grinning with 2 missing front teeth and wearing that same damn hoodie, 3 sizes too big. He smiled barely, then turned out the light. This wasn't revenge, it was repair. The world had looked at his daughter and seen a disruption. He looked at her and saw a standard. And now, so did everyone else. Because the man who built systems behind curtains had finally pulled them back. And the people who thought silence was compliance learned it was strategy. Tina Hawkins didn't expect the letter to come so soon. It arrived by courier, sealed in a plain white envelope, hand-delivered to the address she had listed with Nova Sky HR, her townhouse in a gated neighborhood just north of Atlanta. A place built on golf courses and homeowner committees that smiled at you while measuring the length of your grass. She opened it at the kitchen counter, still in her morning robe, coffee in one hand. Notice of termination. Effective immediately. No warning. No final meeting. No performance review. Just the end. She blinked twice, then read it again. It didn't make sense. Not to her. She had tenure. She had certificates. She had 5-star reviews from passengers who liked how she arranged napkins with folded corners. She was the senior flight attendant, the one who trained the juniors, the one who handled situations. That's how she had described it on her resume. Excellent under pressure, disciplined in conflict resolution. But this wasn't pressure. This was exposure. 3 days ago, she still had her job, still had her confidence. She'd gone on a podcast, talked about the importance of flight crew feeling safe, used all the right buzzwords. They called her brave, called her misunderstood. Then the video hit mainstream news, the unedited version, the look on her face, the moment she took the boarding pass and paused just a second too long, the way she leaned into the word protocol like it was a blade. The camera angle wasn't perfect, but it was enough because America had seen this movie before. And this time, they knew who the villain was. In the days that followed, the mask cracked. Passengers from her previous flights came forward online. Stories emerged, small ones, but eerily similar. She once made my son switch seats because she didn't believe his name was on the manifest. He was 12. Tina rolled her eyes at me when I asked for assistance with my mother, who uses a wheelchair, said it wasn't her job. She told my friend, a black woman, that her outfit wasn't first-class appropriate. This was years ago. We let it slide. Now, no one was letting anything slide. And Tina Hawkins was trending for all the wrong reasons. She tried to fight back. Hired a PR rep who suggested she write a letter to Amira. Apologize. Offered to meet. Frame it as a teachable moment. Tina refused. She disrespected me, she said. She stared at me like I was nothing. The rep looked at her, eyes cold. No, Tina. She stared at you like someone who'd been here before. He dropped her as a client 2 hours later. She called the union. They referred her to legal. Legal said she had no case. There's digital evidence. You escalated the situation. You falsified a report. Tina went quiet because somewhere inside she'd always known. This wasn't just about a hoodie. It was about how she'd weaponized her authority and got caught. Meanwhile, Nova Sky moved quickly. The CEO held a press briefing, crisp and direct. We failed one of our own passengers, he said, and we failed our core values. That failure has consequences. Shareholders weren't angry. They were relieved. The crisis had been contained. Miles Caldwell had stayed. The board had stabilized. And the story for them was now a case study in how to survive scandal by listening to the ones you used to ignore. But Tina, she didn't get a comeback arc. She got silence. Phone calls unanswered. Applications ghosted. Friends from work stopped replying. Her LinkedIn comments turned off. She stood by her kitchen window that evening, watching as a neighbor jogged past without waving. Inside, her TV played an old recording of Amira's speech at the symposium. It was being shared across teacher networks now. Amira wore the hoodie on stage, spoke without looking at notes, and at one point she said, "Power doesn't always shout. Sometimes it just waits. And when it speaks, it's not for revenge. It's for truth. And truth doesn't beg to be believed. It just stays standing when everything else collapses." Tina turned off the TV, and in that moment, she finally understood. She hadn't been taken down by a hoodie. She'd been undone by a mirror. And what she saw in Amira was everything she'd spent years pretending she wasn't afraid of. When people like Tina Hawkins fall, it doesn't happen all at once. It unravels, thread by thread, privilege by privilege, until the person staring back in the mirror doesn't look like the version they spent years curating. The day after her termination, Tina logged into her work email. She knew the account would be deactivated, but part of her still hoped, maybe a message from HR, a reconsideration, maybe a final chance to defend herself. All she saw was the blank gray screen and a notice in red: access denied. She closed her laptop and tried her phone instead. No missed calls, no voicemails, not even a text from Paige, the colleague she used to gossip with between flights, sipping burnt airport coffee while rolling her eyes at those passengers. Paige had been silent since the video dropped. So had everyone. By 2 p.m., her name was back in the news. Only this time, she wasn't speaking for herself. Nova Sky had issued another statement. After a full review of passenger records and crew conduct logs, we have confirmed a pattern of behavior inconsistent with our values. Ms. Hawkins will not return to any role within our airline or affiliates. She read that line 3 times. A pattern. They weren't just firing her. They were defining her. Later that afternoon, she opened Facebook and found a post she wasn't tagged in, but recognized immediately. It was a photo from 5 years ago. Tina, in uniform, standing with a hand on a young black girl's shoulder. The girl's face was turned away, but the caption cut through like a blade. This was my daughter. Tina told her she was too loud for first class. My daughter cried the whole flight. I stayed silent. I won't anymore. Hashtag Hoodie in first class. There were hundreds of comments beneath it, thousands of shares. This wasn't just Amira anymore. This was a reckoning. Tina shut the laptop, walked into her bathroom, and stared at herself. It wasn't about the hoodie. It never had been. It was about the way she looked at people like Amira, as if they needed permission, as if presence was a privilege, not a right. And now, no one was asking for her permission anymore. Not the airline, not the passengers, not the internet, not the story. She tried to get ahead of it. She drafted an email to a local blogger she knew, one who once interviewed her for a Women in Aviation piece. She offered an exclusive. I just want a chance to explain, she wrote, to tell my side, to show people I'm not what they think. The reply came within the hour. Short, brutal. The story told itself. You were holding the mic the whole time. Her neighbor crossed the street later that evening, not to check on her, to ask if she could remove Tina's name from the PTA donation drive list. We're just getting a little too much attention, she said, tight-lipped, voice syrupy with passive shame. Nothing personal. Tina nodded, numb. But inside, everything was personal. That night she Googled herself. What came up wasn't what she'd built over years of climbing the ladder. Not the article about her FAA safety commendation. Not the blog post she wrote on professionalism at 30,000 feet. Not even her LinkedIn profile. Instead, articles, tweets, commentary, and Amira's speech everywhere. The girl she tried to humiliate had become the face of reform. And Tina? The footnote. No control, no platform, no sympathy. Just a name now synonymous with bias and uniform. She went back to the kitchen, poured herself a glass of water, and sat in the dark. Outside, sprinklers kicked on, watering lawns that had been trimmed to perfection. Inside, her career was drying up by the minute. The thing about falling from power isn't just the crash. It's the silence that comes after. When the phone stops ringing, when nobody's listening, when you realize the story you spent your life writing was never really about you. It took Tina 3 more days to open the letter from the Department of Transportation. She knew what it was before she slid her nail under the seal. Official, unapologetic, government stamped with indifference. Inside, a formal notice of investigation. Not criminal, not public, yet, but a warning that the FAA had flagged her conduct for violating passenger civil rights codes under Title VI. She sat down at her dining table, heart hollow, the same table where she once celebrated her promotion to senior flight attendant. Back then, Friends had toasted with sparkling cider and admiration. Now, there was no toast, no one left to toast with. Just a piece of paper reminding her she was no longer protected by the uniform she once wore like armor. Her phone rang, just once around noon. It was a block number. Curious and maybe desperate, she answered. "Miss Hawkins?" The voice on the other end was smooth, male, measured. "This is David Linwood, producer with the National Lens. We're putting together a short-form documentary about race and class tension in air travel. We're featuring Amira Caldwell's story." Tina closed her eyes. "Of course they were." He continued. "We'd like to offer you a chance to participate. Share your reflections, what you saw then, what you understand now. Not to defend yourself, but to help viewers see how we get these things wrong, how we unlearn." Tina opened her mouth, but no words came. He didn't push. "If you say no, we'll understand. But the offer stands for 72 hours. Thank you for your time." Click. Silence again. Tina didn't move for a long while. She looked across the room at the mirror over the fireplace. Clean lines, silver frame. She barely recognized herself in it. No name tag, no blazer, no gate to stand behind. Just a 42-year-old woman who'd lived her life believing that following the rules made her right. Until one day the rules bent, and all she had left was her choice, and she'd chosen wrong. She stood, walked slowly upstairs to the guest room, the one that used to be for her niece when she visited. The bed hadn't been made in weeks. On the nightstand was an old photograph from her flight school graduation. Tina smiling wide in her navy blazer, standing between two black instructors who had mentored her through turbulence and bias. She hadn't spoken to either of them in years, hadn't thought about them until now. Until the image of Amira, silent, patient, unbothered, burned itself into her memory like a scar. Downstairs, she turned the TV on. There was Amira again. Not on a viral clip this time. This was a full sit-down interview. Polished, national. Amira wore a clean denim jacket over her navy hoodie, hair pulled back in a single braid. Her voice was soft but clear. "I didn't speak because I was afraid. I spoke because I knew there were girls watching me who might never be allowed to." Tina reached for the remote, but didn't press mute. The host asked her, "What would you say to people who think you overreacted? That it wasn't about race?" Amira looked into the camera. Not angry, just steady. "I'd tell them they weren't the one being doubted while doing everything right. I'd tell them to wear the hoodie, sit in the seat, and see what happens." Tina closed her eyes, because she had seen what happens. She had caused what happened, and now there was no spin left to offer. The next morning, Tina opened her laptop. She pulled up the email from the documentary producer, clicked reply. She stared at the blank field for a long time before typing, "I was wrong. I didn't understand what I was doing until it was too late. If my story can stop someone else from repeating my mistake, then I'm ready to tell it. Not to save myself, but because the girl I tried to silence never needed saving. I did." She hit send, not to redeem herself, but to finally let go of the version of herself she'd been protecting all these years. Outside, kids played on bikes. The sun came up like it always did. But Tina Hawkins was finally sitting in the one seat she'd avoided all her life. Accountability. And this time, there were no upgrades. Just the long, slow journey of becoming someone else. Someone who listened. The day Amira Caldwell returned to school, no one said a word at first. No welcome banner, no speeches, not even a nod from her AP calculus teacher who had printed out her test in advance and placed it on her desk without eye contact. But something had changed. Not outside her. Not in the walls or the windows or the overly sanitized halls of Eastwood Academy. It had changed in the way people moved around her. Subtle, shifting, slower. Like they were careful now. Like they knew they'd seen her survive something public. something cruel, something they couldn't unsee, and she'd done it without screaming, without suing, without demanding. She had simply refused to break. At her locker, she found a note taped to the inside, plain white paper. No name. It read, "I used to think I had to wear makeup to be seen. Then you walked into school with your hoodie up, and everyone saw you anyway. Thank you." Amira folded it quietly, slid it into her journal, and didn't look around to guess who left it. Some things didn't need to be named. The hoodie was the same. Navy blue, faded at the edges, soft around the wrists where she always tucked her hands. It didn't look like armor, but it had become one. Not because it made her untouchable, because it reminded her she didn't have to change herself to be worthy of space. The hallway chatter picked up again as she walked to class. Eyes met hers, then darted away. But no one whispered. Not anymore. She passed a cluster of juniors. One of them, white boy, baseball jacket, started to open his mouth, then shut it again like he'd thought better of it. She noticed, didn't flinch, just kept walking. That was the win. That afternoon, she sat in the media lab after school, helping Ms. Robinson organize student podcasts. The project had been her idea from the start, giving kids a platform to talk about their lives. No scripts, no judgment, just mics and stories. Ms. Robinson handed her a stack of cue cards. "You sure you want to stay involved with this?" she asked gently. "There's been a lot on your plate." Amira looked up, expression soft but solid. "This isn't something I do because it's easy," she said. "It's something I do because stories matter." The teacher smiled. "Yours certainly did." Amira nodded, then paused. "It wasn't just mine." Later that week, Amira was invited to a local school board meeting. The agenda listed her as special guest. Though she hadn't asked to speak, she almost didn't go. But her father, sitting across from her at the breakfast table, said simply, "Sometimes you speak for the ones who haven't found their voice yet." So she went, hoodie on, this time on purpose. The meeting was packed. Parents, students, staff. 2 rows of folding chairs and people lining the walls. A buzz of anticipation, like everyone knew something meaningful might happen, even if they didn't know what exactly it would be. When they called her name, Amira stood. No applause, just quiet attention. She stepped up to the podium, set her notes down, and took a breath. "I'm not here to talk about the incident. I'm here to talk about what happens after the incident. When the apology fades, when the spotlight moves on, when you're just a black girl in a hoodie again, walking down the hallway and wondering if they see you, or the headline." She looked around the room. Dignity shouldn't depend on what you wear, or who your father is, or how polite you were while they tried to shrink you. She paused. "I didn't win because I was perfect. I won because I refused to let someone else write the ending of my story." A silence fell. This wasn't the fiery speech they were expecting. It was something else. Weighty, quiet, unshakable. After the meeting, a freshman girl followed her to the parking lot. She didn't say much, just walked a few steps behind until Amira noticed her. "You okay?" Amira asked. The girl nodded, then whispered, "I wore my hoodie today." Amira smiled. "Good." That night back home, Amira sat by her bedroom window with her journal open on her lap. The moonlight washed across the page as she wrote slowly. "The lesson isn't that I fought back. The lesson is that I didn't have to become like them to win. I didn't need to yell. I didn't need revenge. I just needed to be still and let the truth do what truth always does. Stand." She folded the page, marked it, then zipped up her hoodie and lay back on her bed. She didn't smile. She didn't cry. She just breathed. Because now, she could. A week later, Amira received an invitation that surprised even her dad. It came by email. Clean, corporate font, polite language. "Dear Ms. Caldwell, We are curating a student-led panel for the National Aviation Inclusion Summit in Washington, D.C. Your story, resilience, and composure have resonated far beyond our industry. We would be honored if you would join the panel and speak on representation, equity, and the future of flight. She read it twice before turning the screen toward Miles. He read it once, then said, "You going?" She shrugged. "You think I should?" He didn't answer with words. He just gave her that look, the same one he gave boardrooms before they agreed to terms they thought they'd never accept. 2 weeks later, Amira stepped off the plane into Reagan International Airport wearing a dark hoodie under a structured coat. Security staff didn't look twice this time. People passed her by like she was anyone, but she wasn't anyone. Not anymore. Her name tag at the summit said, Amira Caldwell, speaker, narratives that shift skies. The irony made her smirk. The ballroom was massive. Glass chandeliers, white linen tables, rows of professionals, journalists, advocates. And on the main stage, 5 chairs. She took the middle one. To her left, a pilot who had broken barriers in the 80s. To her right, a woman who led airport accessibility reforms. And in the audience, a mixture of hope, skepticism, and silence. The moderator began, "Amira, you've become a symbol. Some say an accidental activist. You've said very little since the incident. Why speak now?" She didn't hesitate. "I'm not here to explain what happened to me," she said. "That's already public. I'm here to explain what it means for all the people who don't get a camera pointed at them when it happens." The room leaned in. Every time a hoodie enters a space it shouldn't and doesn't apologize for being there, that's a form of resistance. And every time someone like me refuses to justify their presence, it changes the story for the person who comes next. She paused, not for applause, just for the truth to sink in. After the panel, attendees lined up to shake her hand. One woman, elderly, Caribbean accent, gray curls peeking from under a blue head wrap, held Amira's fingers tight and said, "I prayed for girls like you, quiet but firm. My granddaughter wears her hoodie everywhere now. Won't take it off. Says it's her shield." Amira smiled. It wasn't pride she felt. It was confirmation that everything she had endured, every gaze, every doubt, every attempt to silence her, had created space for someone else. Back home, things didn't slow down. The blog she kept for fun, where she used to post about chemistry tricks and space documentaries, now had over 40,000 subscribers. People didn't want celebrity from her. They wanted wisdom without a spotlight, and she gave it to them in her own way. A post titled, "What I Learned in Seat 1C" went viral again. Not for drama, but for this one paragraph. "They didn't take anything from me I didn't choose to give. They tried to take my peace, but I kept it. They tried to take my silence, but I gave it freely because it belonged to me." Meanwhile, the hoodie, it became more than a symbol. Local schools invited her to speak in it. STEM programs printed it on flyers. A nonprofit asked if they could use its silhouette for a mentorship logo. Amira didn't sell it, didn't trademark it, didn't try to turn it into merchandise. She kept it sacred. Because what they tried to make shameful, she had turned into a standard. One night, while walking home from the library, a group of middle schoolers passed her on skateboards. One of them, a chubby black boy with a crooked smile, doubled back and rode alongside her for a few seconds. "You're the girl from the plane, right?" Amira nodded. "Cool," he said, then lowering his voice, "My cousin says you made it okay for us to wear hoodies in school again." Amira raised an eyebrow. "They banned hoodies?" "Yeah, said it blocks identity." She chuckled. "Maybe it protects it." He grinned. "Yeah, that's what she said too." Then he pushed off and skated ahead. And for the first time in months, Amira felt something new. Not just pride, not just relief, but rootedness. Like she wasn't floating in a storm anymore. She had become part of the ground beneath someone else's feet. And that was more than a win. It was a legacy being born quietly, in motion. Amira never framed the boarding pass from that flight. She could have. Some people asked her to, said she should hang it in a shadow box, turn it into a symbol of her moment. But Amira didn't want to freeze that day in glass. She didn't need to immortalize the trauma. She'd already transformed it, not by making it smaller, but by outgrowing it. In the months following the summit, her name started appearing in unlikely places. A footnote in a university paper on implicit bias in service industries. A slide in a corporate workshop called Presence, Policy, and Perception. A quote on a mural at a middle school in Newark, stenciled beneath a painting of a young black girl in a navy hoodie looking up at the stars. We don't always need louder voices. Sometimes we just need someone who won't walk away. But Amira didn't chase any of it. She focused on her final year of high school, stayed up late working on her senior project, a data model designed to predict airport security delays based on racial profiling reports and flight patterns. When she presented it at the regional science fair, one judge asked, "How did you choose this topic?" She smiled. "Personal experience," she said, and left it at that. One Saturday afternoon, Amira visited a local STEM mentoring event. She'd been invited to speak, but instead she sat in the back for most of it, letting the younger girls take center stage. During a break, a small girl, maybe 11, maybe 12, walked over shyly oversized hoodie sleeves flopping over her hands. "You're her, right?" the girl asked. Amira raised an eyebrow. "Her who?" The girl looked down. "The girl in the story. The plane. The hoodie." Amira smiled gently. "Yeah, that's me." The girl's face lit up. "I told my mom I wanted to wear my hoodie to church. She said no, but I told her it's not bad. You wore yours when they tried to mess with you." "You didn't let them." Amira crouched to meet her eye level. "I didn't wear it to fight," she said. "I wore it because I liked how it felt." "That's enough." The girl nodded, then ran back to her seat. Back home that night, Amira sat at her desk and opened her journal. She flipped past pages filled with pain, with stillness, with slow earned pride. She stopped at a blank page and wrote, "I didn't win because they apologized. I won because I didn't need them to. Their permission was never the prize. My peace was." She stared at the words, then drew a single line under them. Then two. At dinner, her dad asked, "You ready for what's next?" Amira shrugged. "What is next?" Miles smiled. "You'll find out." He passed her the mashed potatoes like it was a business transaction. But in his eyes, there was something deeper, something settled. His daughter didn't need him to fight her battles anymore, because she had found her own way, her own voice, her own stillness. On her final day of high school, she walked into the building wearing that same hoodie. No one asked her to remove it. No one questioned her. They knew better. But more importantly, she knew better. Not just how to exist in a space, but how to own it. Not by changing for it, but by letting it change around her. Later during graduation rehearsal, the principal approached her. He was holding a certificate from the local mayor's office, a community commendation for civic strength and dignified leadership. He looked awkward. "You've had quite a year," he said. Amira accepted the certificate with a small nod, then turned to leave. She didn't wait for his speech. She didn't need his validation. Because now, when people looked at her hoodie, they didn't just see a headline. They saw a story. Not one that demanded justice, but one that delivered it quietly, clearly, completely. Not with fists raised, but with a voice that didn't ask for permission. The morning air was cooler than usual for a Georgia spring. It was the kind of morning that wrapped around your skin without warning, just a light chill that made people pull their sleeves down, pause a little longer over their coffee, maybe even feel something they didn't want to name. Amira stood in front of her full-length mirror, her cap and gown folded neatly on the edge of the bed. The reflection staring back at her wasn't glowing or made up or trying to impress anyone. She wasn't polished for a camera. She was simply Amira, No filters, no soft curls, no performative pearls, just a navy blue hoodie that had already carried her through everything that mattered. She thought about not wearing it, thought about being formal, respectful, picture ready. Then she remembered something she wrote in her journal weeks earlier. Every time I let the world dress me in comfort they approved of, I came home with pieces of myself missing. She slid the hoodie over her shoulders, tugged it snug, and zipped it halfway up. Downstairs, her dad was pouring coffee into a travel mug, already dressed in a charcoal suit. No tie, though. He hadn't worn one since the summit. He looked at her, didn't flinch, didn't blink, just nodded. "You look ready?" Amira tilted her head. "Even with this?" He smiled, soft and proud. "Especially with that." He handed her a granola bar and his keys. "Your day. You drive." The school auditorium had been converted into something half festive, half awkward. Paper streamers hanging unevenly across exit signs, folding chairs arranged in precise rows like everyone was pretending this mattered more than it did. But it did matter, at least to some of them. Amira walked in behind a group of classmates who'd mostly stopped trying to impress her weeks ago. The ones who used to side-eye her hoodie now offered brief nods. Not friendship, not reverence, recognition. She didn't ask for it, but she'd earned it. "Graduates of Eastwood Academy, please line up in alphabetical order." Her last name had always meant she'd be in the final third. She didn't mind. Watching everyone else go first gave her time to breathe. She slipped her hands into her hoodie pocket, felt the small folded note from her little sister inside. "Don't be boring. Wear it. Be you." She smiled, and she didn't take it off. As the principal read off names, most students walked across the stage with choreographed grins. Some waved, some dabbed. One did a cartwheel and got a warning glance from a teacher. When he called, "Amira Caldwell," there was a pause, the kind the room didn't expect. Then a sound that wasn't quite applause. It was quieter, but deeper, more like a ripple, a respectful silence with a pulse beneath it. She walked across the stage slowly, hoodie up, tassel swinging at her side. She didn't smile for the cameras. She didn't bow. She just took up her space fully, and that was enough. After the ceremony, students and families scattered across the front lawn. Balloons bobbed against the sky. Someone blasted music from a Bluetooth speaker. Laughter floated up like soap bubbles. Amira stood alone for a few minutes, diploma in hand, until someone tapped her shoulder. She turned. A white girl from her English class, Haley maybe, stood there with an uncertain smile. "I just wanted to say, I'm glad you didn't let them change you. I'd probably have snapped." Amira nodded. "I almost did." Haley hesitated. "I'm sorry for not saying anything earlier. Back then." Amira shrugged gently. "You're saying something now." Then she walked off, not waiting for more. She found her family near the parking lot. Her mom had flown in last minute from D.C., fresh from a legal summit, eyes fierce with pride. Her sister ran up and shouted, "You wore it! I knew you would!" Amira grinned. "Told you I don't fold easy." They took photos, not too many, enough to remember. On the way home, she drove in silence. Not the uncomfortable kind, the kind that fills a car like sunlight after a storm. She rolled the window down, let the wind hit her face, let the weight of what she'd done settle where it belonged, not as a burden, but as a marker, a quiet, undefeated legacy. She didn't need parades, didn't need plaques. All she needed was that one moment, walking across a stage in a hoodie no one could take off her. The first night after graduation, Amira didn't go to any parties. She didn't throw a cap into the air, didn't post a filtered Instagram story with "we did it" in glittery letters. She didn't even text her classmates back. Instead, she climbed up to the roof, a quiet corner of her house where, as a kid, she used to sit with her dad and trace constellations with her finger. Back then, she thought stars were things you reach for. Now she knew better. You didn't chase stars, you became one. Not because you burned the brightest, but because you stayed lit even when no one was looking. She sat cross-legged in her hoodie, legs tucked beneath her, the hum of crickets below, and the sprawl of Atlanta lights ahead. Her journal was open on her lap, the same one from that flight, the one that had held her voice when the world tried to muffle it. She flipped through its worn pages, past the lines she had written in pain. They see my hoodie before they see me. They want me invisible or angry, not both. Power doesn't always knock. Sometimes it waits until they leave the door unlocked. She stopped at the last blank page, let the silence stretch, then slowly wrote, "This isn't the end of a story. It's the beginning of a way for every girl who walks into a room full of doubt and sits down anyway. For every boy who pulls his hood over his head and refuses to bow. For every silence that isn't weakness. This hoodie doesn't speak for me. It listens with me. And wherever I go, I carry the power of not disappearing." She closed the journal, held it tight against her chest, and exhaled. The next morning she packed. Not just clothes, not just books, but moments, keepsakes, symbols. Her boarding pass from Flight 278. Not framed, but folded, creased where her hands had gripped it tight, never torn. The conference badge from D.C., still smelling faintly of hotel shampoo and achievement. A photo of her younger self in the hoodie, back when it dragged past her knees and made her feel like she was wearing a superhero cape. She didn't pack the hoodie itself. She wore it. Before leaving, she and her dad sat in the kitchen one last time. No big goodbye, no drawn-out advice, just cereal, almond milk, and a soft, "You ready?" She nodded, but then looked up. "Did I do it right?" Miles didn't pretend to misunderstand. He set down his spoon, looked her in the eye. "You didn't win because you had to prove something. You won because you stopped asking permission to exist, and you showed everyone else they didn't need it either." Amira smiled. She stood, picked up her backpack, and slung it over one shoulder. The Uber driver was a black woman in her 40s, gold hoops and locks pulled back in a scarf. Gospel music played softly on the radio. "You headed to the airport?" she asked. Amira nodded. The driver glanced at her through the rearview mirror, then smiled. "I saw your video, the flight thing." With the hoodie, Amira blinked. "Oh?" The driver nodded. "You didn't say much in it. That's what I liked." A beat passed. Then, "You said just enough." At the airport, everything was different. Same check-in counters, same tired fluorescent lights, same security lines. But now, no suspicion, no extra eyes, no clipboard-wielding attendants questioning her name. They knew. Even if they didn't recognize her face, they knew the story. And the story had already walked ahead of her. At gate C-23, she sat by the window and watched planes ascend. She opened her journal one last time and scribbled, "Some people build runways, some people fly, some people were never meant to stay grounded." She closed it, zipped it in her carry-on, then leaned back in her seat, hoodie up, eyes steady on the horizon. The flight boarded on time. Seat 1C, her name on the manifest. Again, no questions, no clipboard. Just a quiet nod from the attendant, a different one this time. Young, black, wearing box braids and a look of pride so subtle it almost vanished, except for the way she met Amira's eyes and held them just long enough to say, "I see you." And Amira. She didn't say a word. She just nodded back, because the hoodie didn't need to speak anymore. It had already walked through everything that mattered. The plane lifted gently, rising into the sky with the quiet force only those who've ever truly been grounded can appreciate. Amira sat in seat 1C again, this time not as a test of belonging, but as a truth already settled. She didn't scan the faces around her. She didn't need to. Their glances were no longer loaded with doubt or fear. If anything, some of them looked at her like they knew they were sitting next to a chapter in something bigger. She leaned against the window, hoodie on, eyes half closed. The hum of the engine blurred the past few months together. The humiliation, the speech, the silence, the reckoning, the healing. It wasn't a perfect ending. It was a powerful one. Somewhere over Tennessee, a flight attendant quietly placed a folded napkin on her tray. No words, just a note scrawled in pen. My little sister wears her hoodie to school now, because of you. Amira ran her thumb across the ink, then folded it in half and slid it into her journal. No reply needed. When the plane landed in Boston, the city greeted her with a brisk wind, the kind that grabbed hold of your coat and whispered, "You're not in Atlanta anymore." She didn't mind. Change had never scared her, not when she knew who she was. She walked through Logan Airport like she had at 12. Only this time there were no eyes that made her shrink. Only space that opened for her without being asked. Her dorm was on the third floor of a modest brick building tucked just off the main green. The name on the door, Caldwell, A. Her roommate had already moved in. The bed across the room was stacked with throw pillows and a small corkboard covered in Polaroids. Amira's side, just a single duffel bag, a half-filled bookshelf, and her hoodie, now draped over the chair like a sentry. She unpacked slowly, one book at a time, one folded truth at a time. And when she was done, she pinned a single quote above her desk, her own words written months ago during the storm she never asked for. Dignity is not something they can give you. It's what you carry into the room, even when no one wants to see it. Orientation week came and went. Professors mispronounced her name, then learned it. Classmates asked polite, loaded questions. "You're that Amira, right? You're the one from the airport video." Was it weird being like, famous? She just smiled and said, "I wasn't famous." The moment was, because that was the truth. The story wasn't about spotlight, it was about legacy. And legacy doesn't wear out with retweets. It wears in, like fabric softened by time. On a cold evening in October, Amira sat in the student union, sipping tea from a paper cup, notebook in her lap. A freshman, black, queer, heavy-set, soft-spoken, slid into the chair beside her with a nervous glance. "I know this is weird," they said, "but can I ask you something?" Amira looked up. "Sure." The student hesitated. "How did you stay quiet when they came for you? How did you not lose it?" Amira thought for a moment, then said, "Because silence isn't the absence of strength. It's the decision to let your truth arrive without screaming." The student nodded, then pulled their hoodie up and smiled. That night, Amira walked back to her dorm alone. The wind tugged at her hoodie, but she didn't pull it tighter. She let it breathe, let it flap behind her like a flag. She didn't check her reflection in any window, didn't second-guess her steps, because this wasn't a march anymore. It was a walk away from the world they tried to make small for her, and a walk into the world she made roomier for others. No cameras, no headlines, just one girl in one hoodie walking toward her future like she already owned it. Because she did, not because she demanded it, but because she never backed away from the seat with her name on it. And if you happened to see her that night, a shadow moving under streetlight, soft and strong, you might not have known her story, but you'd know her truth, because that kind of stillness, it walks different, and it never walks alone. She didn't leave with fireworks. There were no trending hashtags spelling out her name in capital letters. She left the way she entered, quiet, composed, unapologetically herself, wearing that same hoodie. And somehow, in that stillness, she was louder than the noise they tried to bury her under. Amira Caldwell didn't become a hero because she fought back the way they expected. She became a symbol because she refused to be erased, because she showed us all that dignity doesn't come from titles or applause. It comes from the choice to stand your ground when the world tries to move you, to sit in your seat when they try to take it away, to wear your hoodie when they say it doesn't fit their image of excellence. This isn't just Amira's story. It's the story of every black kid who's been told to tone it down, of every girl who's been told she's too quiet to matter, of every voice that was only heard when it stopped asking for permission. We don't win by screaming. We win by being undeniable. And sometimes the loudest revolution is simply existing on your own terms, without explanation. If this story moved you, if it made you think differently about what quiet strength looks like, if it reminded you that power doesn't always raise its voice, then don't just scroll. Subscribe to Silent Power Stories, where stories like Amira's are told the way they deserve to be told, truthful, raw, and real. Share this video with someone who needs to remember that silence isn't weakness. Drop a comment below. What's your hoodie? What's the thing you carry with you that the world tried to use against you, but now it's your power? And most of all, stay watching, stay thinking, stay walking, because we're not done. Not until every story is heard, every seat is taken, and every hoodie walks without fear.